On Thursday, we got 3 new names in the Phoenix Suns head coaching search. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, I'll tell you why, really, I just keep coming back to the same 2 names. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to close out your week. The offseason continues. A lot to get to, a lot to cover, a lot to follow. So if you need that in your bloodstream every single day, Locked On Suns is the place to do it. Hit follow or subscribe. Get this show in your feed every single day. Become an everydayer, just like the thousands who already are. Hit the YouTube comment section to give your thoughts on the next Suns coach. Follow along at Locked On PHX Suns to interact and engage throughout the offseason. Tons of ways to get involved, but also just listen. All right. Today's show, guys, brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA when you enter the promo code LockedOnNBA. They'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with each and every single order. 3 new names in the Suns head coaching search via Adrian Wojnarowski on Thursday. Pretty early in the day, setting things off as we get more and more news in what I think is now 8 openings around the NBA for head coaches. Woj's tweet. The Suns have started to gather permission on several assistants for head coaching interviews, including Sacramento's Jordi Fernandez, Milwaukee's Charles Lee, and Memphis's Darko Rajakovic. That last name will probably sound familiar to a lot of you because Darko was actually on this Suns coaching staff at one point in the first season that Monty was here, and came from Oklahoma City where he had coached with Monty. Then went on to Memphis where he elevated to a higher role and obviously a young up-and-coming team, and was able to become, I think he's the associate head coach there and has been a candidate the past few years as a head coach. All good candidates. I think Jordi Fernandez is somebody who should have a job in the NBA, in my just personal opinion, kind of, covering this stuff and thinking about it. I'm definitely not sourced enough to know anyone in the Kings world or the Nuggets world where he was before. I'm not, reporting. I just think he, having done what he did alongside Mike Brown, revolutionizing, overhauling that Kings offense, getting the most out of De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, as well as some of their young role players, and his work in Denver prior to that, as well as before, where he was just a player development guy who eventually Mike Brown, I think, hired to be his personal assistant. And then ever since then, he's developed and kept that relationship with Mike Brown, coached Team Nigeria at the Olympics with Mike Brown, and then obviously when Brown got that head coaching job, went to Sacramento with him and had a lot of success. Charles Lee is somebody who I believe is an Ivy League guy who was a Wall Street trader before he became a assistant coach, if I'm remembering correctly. He's up for the Bucks job. He's up for, probably will continue to be up for a lot of jobs. And then I just mentioned Darko. Good candidates, all 3. Exactly the types of guys that I've been advocating for the Suns to go after. I've told you from the very night that Monty was hired, you can go back. The Everydayers heard that episode. You could listen to it yourself if you haven't. When I said, in my personal opinion, the Suns should be not shy about interviewing first-time head coaches, including Kevin Young, who's not on this list, but is very clearly in the running to be the next head coach of the Phoenix Suns by every account, whether it's a national insider, John Gambadoro here locally, who's been giving us some detailed reporting, etc. Everybody seems to believe that he is a legitimate candidate. And so when I look at those 3 names, despite being pretty impressed, I'm sure there are others, as Woj's tweet indicates, several assistants including, which means those 3 are not the only 3 that the Suns might speak with. Talked about Dan Craig In the first episode that I did with candidate options, I think he would still be somebody that I would look at from the Clippers. He was with the Heat for a very long time and has been with the Clippers the past 3 seasons under Ty Lue. I think somebody like Chris Quinn, who's still in Miami, former player who you might remember with the Spurs, and then has been with the Heat staff as a player development guy, kind of working his way up from there. I think there's any number of good assistants that you could find. I think Johnny Bryant, personally, from the Knicks, he learned under Quinn Snyder, and then he has been with the Knicks, and their offense obviously took a big step forward, and he got a lot more out of the offense on a Tibbs team than most assistants have been able to. So I think there's a lot to be said there. Tons of good options is the bottom line. I come back to Kevin Young out of these options. And of who we've heard now, right? If Ty Lue is available, we'll get to him in a second. There's more news on him as well. I still think that should be option number 1. But if the Suns are seriously considering this as a plan B to hire a first-timer, I can admit that it is a risk, right? I can admit that it is a risk to bring a new person in. And considering the stakes of next season for the Phoenix Suns, you can't afford to F around and find out, right? You can't afford to not bring a sure thing in. And the honest reality is no first-time head coach is a sure thing. But I think some are more certain than others, and some are more sure than others. And Kevin Young, to me, is one of the most sure things that the Suns could find. I don't know enough to speak to his X's and O's. What are his personal philosophies as a basketball mind, basketball thinker versus what Monty's were? But what I can speak to is that Kevin Young was somebody that Monty very heavily credited for some of the changes that the Suns have implemented in recent years. Most notably, I think, embracing offensive rebounding this season. And the Suns went from bottom 10 to top 10 in offensive rebounding, and every chance he got, Monty credited Kevin Young for convincing him of the value of that. That's something that, most analytics people will tell you, most smart basketball people these days will tell you, that the league has kind of gone away from that, and it's a little bit more of an advantage now than it used to be. You should always be prioritizing it. The league just sort of forgot to for a while, maybe because the Warriors played so small and didn't necessarily own that category, and a lot of teams started to think, well, we don't have to either. Well, turns out you do. That's just one example, but really the reason that I think that Kevin Young is the guy I come back to over and over when I'm thinking, based on who the names we've heard so far are, is the relationships that he's bound to have with Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. Gambo has reaffirmed what I said, not reported. His seems to be more reported, but I said from the beginning, I don't take it lightly that Kevin Young is the guy who works Booker out and seems to be his sort of one-on-one companion on the coaching staff. As far as I've ever seen around the league, it's not super common that an associate head coach level guy, the top assistant on a team, like Kevin Young would be the person to go out pregame and warm up the star player. Warm up any player for that matter. In Golden State, it's Bruce Frazier who works out Steph. He is not the number 2 by any means on that Golden State staff, but he's Steph's guy, right? I think for Durant, when Durant got to Phoenix, it was Jarrett Jack. Like, he's one of the lower level coaches for the Suns, right? And so the fact that Kevin Young does that is just a symbol of what I believe seems like a pretty close basketball relationship. I'm not saying that they're hanging out every weekend together. I doubt that. But I do feel like that signals to me a level of trust that Booker is placing in Kevin Young about his game, right? Kevin Durant is also a part of this. And without being too harsh, because I don't know the ins and outs, I don't really know if there's ever been a coach that has coached Kevin Durant who he has had a super strong relationship with. He jokes about PJ Carlesimo his first year, who played him at the 2 guard spot, and goofy. I mean, that was one-off thing, but that wasn't a long-term relationship. Scott Brooks, maybe Durant had a good relationship with that guy. I don't know, but he wasn't maximizing what Durant was on the court. Billy Donovan, well, Durant left Oklahoma City after Donovan became the coach, so I don't think that was some sort of, perfect bond by any means either. I would say Steve Kerr, from everything you can read that's out there, it wasn't awful. It wasn't excellent. It was somewhere in between. I think from a basketball standpoint, there was a certain level of, do we need to be so scripted about everything that Durant kind of got frustrated with as it pertained to Kerr. And I think that there was also a level of trust and obviously personal connection that had to be there, considering Kerr has accomplished a lot and embraced Durant and everything else. It seems like Durant had a lot of good relationships in that organization. So again, not terrible. I doubt anyone would call it terrible, but I also don't think it would be the best friendship or basketball relationship Durant's ever had in his life. Steve Nash, well, we can go even back to Kenny Atkinson, who got fired after Durant and Irving arrived in Brooklyn. Jacques Vaughn was supposed to basically become the head coach. He was the interim head coach, but for whatever reason, he did not get that promotion. Steve Nash ends up getting that job. Well, then Nash gets fired. And then Jacques Vaughn takes over again, and shortly thereafter, Durant and Irving leave. So I don't know if there's a coach out there in the world that Durant has a really deep relationship with. I would have thought Monty might have been one of those guys based on their history together and the Team USA stuff and whatever. I guess Greg Popovich seemed to have a love affair with Durant in terms of just fawning over him at the Olympics. Totally understandable. Greg Popovich is not coming anywhere. Wasn't going to happen before Victor Wembanyama. It's definitely not happening now. So where does that leave you? You probably need to go with somebody that you know Book trusts and that Durant commits to, and I just keep coming back to Kevin Young of the names that we've heard so far. That is unless Ty Lue is available. On the other side, is he? Or is he using the Suns? First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Bird Dogs, my new favorite shorts. They gave us all a sample on the Locked On Podcast Network, and I can attest to the fact that they are wonderfully comfy and look good as well. I look better and feel great wearing Bird Dogs. Their stretchy fabric fits well, breathes well, and makes you look good. They give you the freedom to wear one pair of shorts or pants, whether I'm going to the golf course, a meeting, a date, or just hanging out with friends. They look nice, but not too nice. They're professional, but not uncomfortable. Perfect stuff. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. Enter the promo code LockedOnNBA to get a pair for yourself. Try it. You'll love it. And they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with each and every order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA to get a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with your new pants or shorts. That'll change your life. Jake Fisher over at Yahoo Sports reported on Thursday that, quote, Ty Lue has often been mentioned as a primary target for both the Bucks and Suns coaching jobs, but there is pessimism among people familiar with Lue and the Clippers front office that the respected play caller can actually be poached from Los Angeles. I said, quote, I'm not reading it verbatim. You'll get the point either way. Steve Ballmer, known to have a strong affinity for Lue and his coaching acumen, sources said, and the Clippers still very much harbor championship aspirations. Also consider the challenge facing Milwaukee and Phoenix with emptied cupboards of draft capital. Chris Haynes reported, actually on Wednesday, that I didn't mention because we were talking free agency stuff on Wednesday's show, or on Thursday's show that we recorded on Wednesday. Chris Haynes said, Ty Lue's representatives met with the team this week to discuss the coach's future. This meeting comes on the heels of a report that the Suns are expected to explore the possibility of poaching Lue from the Clippers. And this is the important piece from Chris Haynes. If both sides were to agree to expanding the pact, it would likely come in the form of a new deal rather than an extension. So I believe, if I remember from what I had read previously, that Ty Lue had a 5-year contract when he first became coach of the Clippers. That was heading into the 2021 season, when obviously the Suns faced him and the Clippers in the conference finals. So it's been 3 seasons now. He has 2 remaining. He doesn't seem to want an extension, but, you coach this season. Next year, Kawhi and Paul George can be free agents, and at that point, you'll only have 1 year left on your deal. He's getting to the point where the organizational future is a little bit cloudy, and his own, as a result of that, and with his contract status, is also uncertain. I think that begs the question, is Ty Lue actually interested in another team? Or is he and his representation at Clutch Sports, and I'm not trying to throw shade at that agency, that just happens to be his agency, taking the opportunity of all of these openings to basically drum up the price, drum up the urgency, buy Steve Ballmer in the Clippers front office to give him a new contract that he wants, another 5 years, let's say. Maybe a raise. I think it's obvious that's part of what's happening here. But I don't think that it's one or the other, right? I think it would be overly simplistic to just sort of be like, okay, he's not interested at all. This is all just for money. I mean, if you're smart, if you're negotiating the right way, you don't close the door on anything, right? And so Clutch, Lue, everyone involved, anything could happen. But what's his first priority? And I think from a roster standpoint, from a basketball standpoint, you would probably say that the base level of what you're coaching, which is the best players, you probably would favor Phoenix. And maybe I'm a homer for saying that. Maybe I'm just looking too myopically from the point of view of where I live, where I cover, what I care about. But it feels like a young Devin Booker and a Kevin Durant, who is under contract for 3 additional seasons after this, or, this coming season and 2 more, is a pretty good situation compared with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, who I believe can become free agents next summer, and whose availability is often in question. I mean, Kawhi more so than Paul George, obviously. Yes, they both have player options for the final year of their contract for $49 million that they could exercise next summer to become free agents. I think you would rather coach those guys, Booker and Durant. However, that's not the only consideration, right? The Clippers have a much deeper roster, and the reason they have a much deeper roster is probably the same reason that Ty Lue would have the most reason to prefer the Clippers situation over the Suns situation, which is deeper pockets, more of a willingness to spend, and a better starting point, right? The Suns are sort of starting from scratch on their roster in a lot of ways around Booker and Durant. Maybe they keep Ayton and it's a little less starting from scratch, but, even if you get rid of Chris Paul, let's say you bring back Torrey Craig and Josh Okogie and Jock Landale, and then Ayton, Durant, and Booker. Okay, you got 6 guys. 3 of them are, fringe rotation players, and the other 3 are good, but the Clippers have 10 guys of NBA caliber players that they're already going to be starting with to trade, to mess with in any sort of way to build the championship roster that you want. The other part of this is it's not just a new contract versus not a new contract and who's giving that new contract to me. It's also how much money am I making? And I would imagine, if I'm just blindly guessing here, most times, 100 out of 100 times, Steve Ballmer's offer for a new contract for Ty Lue is going to be higher than Matt Ishbia's. Mostly because Steve Ballmer is worth tens of billions of dollars and Matt Ishbia is worth maybe $10 billion or whatever it is that he's worth. I don't even think it's 10 last I looked. So, obviously, when you're talking about billions, any price tag can be matched. It's not as if Steve Ballmer is going to offer Ty Lue $100 million. All these guys are replaceable to a point, But if you're asking me who's going to give Lue a better offer, it's probably the Clippers. And Ty Lue probably knows that. And so again, we return to the idea that it is no coincidence that Ty Lue met with the team, brought up the idea of a new contract, and all these leaks about how the Bucks and Suns are interested started to come out. And so then you get to what could you do if you're Matt Ishbia to get Ty Lue? As Jake Fisher pointed out with the compensation, the Bucks and Suns both are pretty severely hampered in terms of what they would really be able to offer to get Lue from the Clippers. Now, some of that to me is just like, it's just a leverage thing, right? It doesn't really matter. The Clippers aren't really in need of a first-round pick for their coach if they know that's the end of the road with their coach. It's just sort of like the cost of doing business, right? So that's one part. Remains to be seen. The Suns can't really trade a pick, period, so it would have to be a couple of really bad second-round picks, which, we'll see if the Clippers bite on that. But if it really got sour between them, then it doesn't really matter. Again, it's just something to give up. The bigger thing is, can you beat a Steve Ballmer offer? Very well, you could. It might be an overpay. It might be a bad investment, but you could. I mean, you could pay a coach however much you want, and I'm sure Ballmer has a number. There's also the idea of if Kawhi Leonard or Paul George ask for a trade, all bets are off. Everything changes. We'll talk about that when the time comes. So I want to just put that there, that's obviously a component. The last piece would be, does Ty Lue want something like front office say? Would you be willing to offer him that? Is that on the table? I think it's an open question. Matt Ishbia has already acted very aggressively. It would not surprise me if he offered something like that. But also knowing Ty Lue, the family stuff that he's been open about, the time that he spent away from the Cavs once upon a time to deal with his physical and mental health at that point, all of that stuff is relevant, and I don't know what direction it makes him go. Does it make him actually say, if I don't get a new deal from the Clippers and the Suns don't blow me away, maybe I'll just step away again? Move on from coaching for the time being. Or maybe something you could offer him is more flexibility, whatever. Great in theory. I don't want to be naive. Do coaches ever actually get flexibility and time away and work-life balance? Probably not, but maybe there's something to that. If he has not had a good experience with it with the Clippers, with the constant stress of the availability of the stars and the pressure to win and a very intense owner, which would be the same in Phoenix. These are all things that will matter, but the bottom line is Ty Lue is very clearly utilizing the possibility of a Suns or Bucks offer for him to gin up additional interest, higher salary, etc. Where does it go from here? We don't know, but it very well could just go to a new contract to be the head coach of the Los Angeles Clippers. Closing out the show, can Deandre Ayton be the next Andrew Wiggins in a trade to a new team, a new situation? Or could he be the new D'Angelo Russell who gets the next Andrew Wiggins? I'll tell you what I mean next. First, one more quick break. Closing out the show, let me remind you of the Andrew Wiggins trade from the Minnesota Timberwolves to the Golden State Warriors. You'll remember it as originally D'Angelo Russell ended up on the Warriors by way of Brooklyn when Durant left. So this was a rolling over of the asset by the Golden State Warriors to finally get Andrew Wiggins, but they actually got way more, which you might have forgotten about. So Minnesota got Russell and then two former first-round picks of the Warriors, Jacob Evans III and Omari Spellman. Spellman might have been a second-round pick, but two guys who were basically not in their plans anymore. Sorry to the YouTube audience. Allergies. You know the deal. You just heard that crash, and you will see me wiping my nose, and we will get back on track with the trade. The Warriors got Andrew Wiggins, a 2021 Minnesota first-round pick, top 3 protected, and a second-round pick from Minnesota as well. That is one of the biggest steals in the history of trades, right? But it wasn't so certain at the time. Gerson Rosas, who was the lead executive in Minnesota at that time, was under a lot of pressure to turn things around to finally win. He was eventually fired for somewhat performance, but largely a workplace relationship a la Ime Udoka. And also, Cat was friends with D'Angelo Russell, right? We know that's about the time when the Booker stuff started up. Oh, are they going to team up in Minnesota? That's hilarious in retrospect, but that was what was out there. So that's what went into it. But the Warriors took a chance on Wiggins, and they got a really good pick that ended up becoming Jonathan Kuminga. So they basically got Wiggins, Kuminga, and Kuminga for D'Angelo Russell. The reason I bring all of this up is to say the Suns have a similar opportunity with Deandre Ayton, but you don't know which side of it they're going to be on, right? On the one side was D'Angelo Russell, a former, I think he was the 3rd overall pick by the Lakers once upon a time, then went to the Nets, then went to the Warriors, then went to the Timberwolves, now back to the Lakers. He turned out basically like what we thought, an inconsistent scoring guard who, doesn't play huge minutes in the playoffs, doesn't impact the game as a defender all that much, but can be a microwave scorer, has made a lot of money, has had a solid career. Andrew Wiggins became, a finals MVP candidate. I mean, he was the second best player for the Warriors in a championship, in a finals series, right? Which one is Ayton going to be? I think that there will be interest. That's one of the things, as I've talked it out on the podcast and brought other people on and just sort of tried to make sense of it. I think that there will be, even what, guys like Tim McMahon have reported, I think that there will be a market for Deandre Ayton. So there's going to be trades out there. The question is, are you giving up on somebody like the Wolves gave up on Wiggins after a lot of disappointing seasons and not a lot of improvement and not a lot of structure around him to make him better that the Warriors were able to offer? They gave up, Wiggins turned it around, and they probably regret that trade. Or are you going to be, in Ayton, are you going to be trading away D'Angelo Russell, who you're probably correct to give up on, who has not improved that much since he left your team, and who you might be able to get a return for that feels like a steal 3 years later, like that trade does now? So let me give you some candidates that the Suns could trade Ayton for who represent a little bit of a buy low candidate like Wiggins was when the Warriors traded Russell for him, that the Suns could get back for Ayton and feel really good. Or I don't want to say really good. You tell me. You think about it, and I'll tell you what I think after I list them off. So John Collins is number one. We know the Suns like him. We know the Suns had interest in him when they were potentially going to pivot off of the Durant trade in February and before Ishbia gave up, our Phoenix chosen son, Mikal Bridges. So we know they like him. I think that he is a very solid player who I could easily see getting better when he is in a different situation. I mean, I think he has weak side rim protection ability. If the jump shot ever comes back for him after I think he broke his thumb or sprained his thumb or something. And he's obviously a freak athlete who, shoots well around the basket and all that stuff. Anthony Simons, who I think is a very likely guy to be traded if the Portland Trail Blazers decide we're going to keep Lillard, we're going to try for one big swing one more time and see what happens. Simons will very likely be out of Portland in that case. Colin Sexton. He's in Utah. He has struggled with injuries throughout his whole career, but he is very possibly somebody who you could see taking a step forward on a good team. Maybe he's a low-minute starter. Maybe he is a bench player, but he's also not making a max, so he's not exactly like Wiggins would be, right? He's a little cheaper and a little bit more of a value. Jonathan Isaac. Don't laugh, but setting aside you can't set aside the injuries. You don't know when he's going to be back. You don't know if he'll ever be healthy. You would probably be getting something back with him for Ayton in a trade like that, but it's there. Isaac has talent. The last one would be Zach LaVine or Kristaps Porzingis. Now, those guys are both around 27, 28 years old. They've already had a little bit of a reset. They've already had multiple opportunities to do what it is that they do. But they are both players who, in a different situation on a better team, you could see potentially being even better. Those would be veterans. Those would be expensive players. You're probably not expecting them to improve what they like, their talent or their skill, but maybe there's something there on a good team. That's just 6 names. Maybe another one comes to mind. Those guys aren't super young, but remember, Wiggins was already on his second contract when this happened. I think he was maybe 23, 24. So, Simons, Collins, Sexton, those guys are all in the right age range. Isaac, Levine, Porzingis, a little bit older. But that's probably a best case scenario for an Ayton trade, is can you get something without having to give up picks or attach anything to it? Because frankly, you really can't with how limited the Suns are. But you basically just do a sort of a straight up swap. Your guy for our guy. The person you are done waiting on and the person we're done waiting on. Can we find a middle ground here where we both come out happy, both players get a reset, and we can try to figure something out? I probably put Collins and Simons at the top of that list. I think both players are very likely to get traded this summer. Do those teams like Ayton enough? For Atlanta, it would have to be getting rid of Clint Capella. For Portland, it would probably be that you are, orchestrating a bigger trade on the side for maybe it's part of a 3-team deal or something where Ayton is probably the 3rd best player on that team and you're getting an even better player. Maybe you sign and trade Jeremy Grant for something, or you trade Yusuf Nurkic and a bunch of draft picks. Portland has a lot to figure out. But those are the 2 guys, and I think both would frankly be pretty solid in Phoenix. Simons would have some defensive questions. Maybe he ends up coming off the bench. Collins, it's like, okay, well, you still need a center. Nothing's perfect, but I like those options, and I think that's the way to be thinking about the Deandre Ayton saga as it comes to an end. That'll wrap today's show up, guys. Done for the week. More news likely over the weekend. Who knows? Maybe we'll be a lot closer to a head coach by next Monday. Only time will tell. Hit follow or subscribe. Get this show in your feed every single Monday through Friday. Become an everydayer. Get locked onto your favorite team. And I'll talk to you guys on Monday.